Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jake LaQuire. And after being gone a week, we are back. I think it's fitting that we're back today as a Panthers podcast because yesterday we got teased as a fan base. Absolutely teased. And when I tell you that was probably one of the most anticlimactic moments I can remember from like a Panthers social media standpoint, I it's got to be up there. It's hard to top what they did yesterday.
We used to be the best, like the cream of the crop during the late Rivera years, and now I just don't get it. They tease this image. It's like a dark gray charcoal anthracite background with 4 blue claw marks in it, and people are like, "Oh my goodness, new jerseys, maybe a new helmet, something like that. Maybe we're making our black jerseys our primary jerseys," which I would be a fan of. But then maybe 5 or 6 hours later, they posted the season hype video. And the slogan for the season, I guess, is hashtag leave our mark. And they had to clarify today that they're not getting rid of keep pounding, which I think it's weird that they even had to clarify that because that's the slogan. And not often do we have other slogans other than that. I guess 2 states, 1 team. It's also one of our slogans, catchphrases, what have you. But to go out on a limb and post that and then follow it up with a hype video. I love a good hype video, but you don't need to tease stuff like this, in my opinion. And just a ton of Panthers fans are in a bit of an uproar, just disappointed, trying to figure out what it means. And then some people still think that they're teasing all black uniforms as the primary. Don't think you can have a non-light color as your primary per NFL rules. So don't know how that would work, but I think all in all, I'm a bit disappointed. I don't think you need to. You can tease things like the schedule release, even though I'm kind of a stickler for the schedule release thing. I think for stuff like that, you can tease it, but I'm not sure why a hype video had to be teased. Other than I know they're engagement farming, they're click farming, doing what they got to do. But I think all in all, most of Panthers Nation is kind of disappointed that they chose to go that route.
This becomes, I think, the boy who cried wolf, in the sense that the media team is hyping up this fan base and then obviously underperforming or underselling at this point. And so with that in mind, I think that the big concern when we talk about kind of the Panthers media team and just like maybe outlooks on uniforms and stuff is like, it would be nice for it to change. And I think the direction, like as much as like the black unis or maybe like a design from the helmet, what would be cool is we see our players get drafted each year and they show the blue jerseys. Like, make that the primary, like change it up. Like that's the Carolina blue that I think represents the Carolinas a lot more, allows you to maybe change the pants with it, to give it a new feel with the same color palette. So I don't know what the direction is. I'm just saying if we are going to take a direction, maybe that is where we head to kind of play within the rule structure of the NFL. But moving on, today we continue our Mount Rushmore series, and we're gonna talk about wide receivers. And so if you caught the title of the episode, it's Rice above it all. And Jerry Rice is the greatest wide receiver to play all time. We're talking about a player with 10 first team all pros. A lot of the other wide receivers we're going to talk about don't have any more than 5. And we're talking about some great wide receivers today. So the fact that he has 10 of them is insane. The year that he caught 22 touchdown passes. Do you know how many games he played that year?
I do, because I have the stats up, so I'm kind of cheating. But to do it in 12 games is incredible, right? And you mentioned 10 first-team All-Pros. He had 11 straight 1,000-yard seasons. There aren't many people who have 11,000-yard seasons in general. I'm sure Mike Evans will. I
think he just surpassed that.
I thought he got 10. I thought he got to 10 to start his career. But
it's the start of his career. That's what it was. Yeah. I was like, I knew he had a record somewhere.
Because Jerry Rice only had 927 in his first season, a season in which he only started 4 games, which again is incredible, right? But led the league in touchdown passes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, 10 all pros, like you're saying. His records are never going to be touched, quite frankly. Receptions, he still leads with 1,549. Yards, over 22,000. most quarterbacks don't even get to 20,000 yards. And then 197 receiving touchdowns, just over 200 total scrimmage touchdowns. He had a handful of rushing, but no one's ever going to come close to these numbers. It's like the Tom Brady thing. We can see a couple QBs get up there because it's not as punishing a position, right? The league tries to protect quarterbacks. They don't have to deal with like a corner jamming them every play. They don't have to sprint 20 yards every play like wide receivers do. So when you see somebody like Jerry Rice, who did it for the large part of his entire career, really only slowed down in those last 2 seasons where I believe he was in Oakland and then the final season, Seattle. Other than that, pretty much a flawless record. He had a season where he was injured, so you can't really count that. But within the scope of his prime, I don't know if we would, other than maybe Tom Brady and maybe LeBron James, because his prime has been pretty long throughout his career. I don't know if we're ever going to see somebody's prime go for like 10 to 13 seasons of consecutively being one of the best. This was a guy, like, he was doing this so much that they were investigating his gloves and stuff and saying like, oh, he's wearing stickum, we can't wear these kinds of gloves and that kind of thing. That's how good of a player Jerry Rice was.
His production was out of this world. This is a guy that was producing at the top of the league at his position and did it for a long time. Like, this is the LeBron James of the NBA at his position. And it's special because you have guys like Larry Fitzgerald in the NFL and that longevity aspect, like a Frank Gore for running backs. But it's just a different level of dominance when you're the best of the best, because currently we can talk about Mike Evans in that same breath, but it's like, how many first team all pros does this guy have? How many records has he set? It's more, he's just been consistently a really great player, not elite for 10, 15 years, which is just insane to think about, and really just puts him in a completely different air to where even modern receivers that we talk about, whether it's a Tyreek Hill or maybe a Justin Jefferson that's coming up. Justin Jefferson's been in the league 5 years. I think he has around like 7,000 receiving yards. He would have to keep doing what he's doing for another decade to come close to Jerry Rice's numbers. And that's hard to do. Like, he might be able to pull it off, but like you said, almost 200 receiving touchdowns, over 20,000 receiving yards, like just insane numbers. Like, Larry Fitzgerald is second all time and he has 17,000 yards. And I think the only wide receiver to be over 15,000 yards is Terrell Owens. I'm like, that's just, it's crazy to think about. And so, like, after him, I think the next guy that really would be considered a lock when you talk about impact on the game, like when a backyard football game is kind of called after you, you have some staying power, and that's Randy Moss. I mean, this guy was electric the second he touched the field. 17 receiving touchdowns in his rookie year. I think that was the year he caught 3 touchdown passes on Thanksgiving against the Dallas Cowboys as a FU to Jerry Jones. And then he would go on to break Jerry Rice's record with Tom Brady in 2007 with 23 receiving touchdowns. Obviously did it in 4 more games, but was an accomplishment he has. This is a guy that had all the intangibles: height, speed, hands. You could double, triple team him. He was getting open. He was bringing the ball down. Why would there be any reason Randy Moss is not on the list? I don't think there is. I'm just curious if there's an angle where because of this, Randy Moss falls short.
Maybe if you're a Packers or Lions fan or Bears fan, or I guess when he went to the Patriots, if you're a Bills fan or a Jets fan, you might leave him off there, but that's about it. When we look at Jerry Rice's accomplishments and his longevity, his total records, he's the best that there's ever going to be, right? But when I think of the ideal wide receiver taking traits from everybody, I think Randy Moss is purely the best player to ever play the wide receiver spot. Like you're saying, there's a thing named after him. Getting Moss is his thing, and it's because he was able to consistently get over the top of corners. He wasn't like a 6'6", like hulking human or anything, but he had good size, 6'2", 6'3", was able to jump up, get over people. You said 6'4"?
6'4", yeah. I was trying to interrupt.
You're
good. I was like, there's a difference between 6'2" and 6'4", but
I didn't want to sell him short. He was 6'4", you're right, 210 pounds when he came into the league, so pretty good size, right? Like, that's Julio Jones level size. That's Calvin Johnson, a little under Calvin Johnson level size, and consistently producing throughout, right? Did it forever with the Vikings, continued their storied run of receivers. But then I really think that when he made it to New England, and people were writing him off after the Raiders years, because that second Raiders year, only 500 yards, but goes to New England with Tom Brady, ignites a Super Bowl run. They didn't win, obviously, because of the Giants' heroics and their NASCAR front and stuff like that. But reigniting that, getting to 23 receiving touchdowns, just incredible. When we talk about Mount Rushmore, one of the prerequisites was how, like, can you talk about the game of football without this person? You can't talk about the game of football or even just backyard football like you're talking about without saying the words, "You got mossed." And I think his impact, just even at that level, just screams that he has to be on the Mount Rushmore.
He was a character. And not to bring this around to like wide receivers being divas, I think another guy we're going to talk about on this list kind of fits that mold a little bit more. But being a character, having fun with the fans. There was a time where he did score a touchdown in Lambeau and he mooned kind of the fans, since that's the tradition at Lambeau's. They would moon pretty much the opposing team's bus as they left. And it was just kind of like a funny homage. And it's just that kind of banter that he had along with the player he was just really, really special. Again, this was a guy that had the speed of like type some of these speedsters while having this of a Calvin Johnson. And obviously, I don't think he was nearly as fast as some of the top end guys or as big as some of the top end guys, but have that mixture and combination was really special and allowed him to dominate in a way we may never see again. There are guys that come along that have the speed, that have some of the size, but just don't have the moxie to go up and just the moss a dude. And so the lead into a guy that I think this is where we start getting into murkier waters, where does he meet the criteria to get in? But I think that threshold is kind of around Terrell Owens. And so with Randy Moss, Jerry Rice, all the stats, all the accolades, T.O. kind of joins that company. He's that guy where I talked about one of three to be over 15,000 receiving yards, a bunch of receiving touchdowns, performed at multiple spots. We saw him perform early on in his career with Jerry Rice. And I think that was Steve Young initially. And then it turned into him and Jeff Garcia really tearing it up. Then he goes to Philadelphia, tears it up with Donovan McNabb. I think broke his leg, plays in the Super Bowl on a broken leg, like completely balls out. And then after some drama, getting benched by Andy Reid the following year, balls out in Dallas with Tony Romo and Drew Bledsoe. And for him to keep putting up those numbers, and when you look at the guys that he was playing next to, this wasn't like a Marvin Harrison, Reggie Wayne with Peyton Manning kind of situation. Where he went, he played with, I would say, average to maybe top quarterbacks, and he dominated as being kind of the only guy in the wide receiver room. And to me, that's the definition of a true X wide receiver who carved out an insane role and had amassed a ton of production. So it's kind of hard to argue with that. Didn't get the first ballot Hall of Famer because of off the field, maybe even on the field issues.
The Hall of Fame's a whole thing. I think they tend to favor, first of all, players who played in I don't want to say a bygone era, but like the older era. Those people like that are always favored. And it's also the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So there are other qualifications too, like your college record, if you coached, your coaching record, that kind of thing. But I don't think there's any reason T.O. shouldn't have been a first ballot Hall of Famer as far as the stuff on the field goes. Same with Luke Kuechly, right? Luke Kuechly is a top 2 or 3 inside linebacker to me. I think the bias aside there, and still he didn't get in the first ballot Hall of Fame. Hall of Fame is just a weird thing. NFL in particular, it's not as bad as baseball, but the NFL's Hall of Fame isn't the best. But with T.O., 5 first-team All-Pros, like you're talking about. Really, after he left the Niners, I think that's when he came into his own, because he did still have to deal with a little bit of the Jerry Rice era there, but still produced, even as a number 2 guy, pretty consistently getting over 1,000 yards, over 10 touchdowns. And I think you can't talk about the game without him. And the character thing, putting the ball on the star in Dallas, like these are the things that I think
the
of.
Popcorn.
The popcorn.
Yeah,
why, if there's any position that's a diva and that's kind of celebrated, it is the wide receiver spot. And I think when you do that stuff, but you back it up as one of the best in your era, right? He really straddled the Jerry Rice and Randy Moss eras, but still competed and was right up there with them. Like I said, 5 first-team All-Pros. That's not by accident when you're in an era with those kind of receivers. And he didn't have like a Tom Brady, right? He didn't start off with Joe Montana, or if he did, it was like for 1 year in the lean year before Steve Young. And then he did it with Bledsoe and Romo, like you're talking about. It's hard after the first two to find like a suitable, all right, this guy has to be on there. Like we talked about it with QBs, with running backs, it was easy. But I think out of all the remaining receivers, Owens fits that bill the most. And for me, that's why he's on there. Like, even if you wanted to say he's not top two, for me, he's easy top three. And I don't think I could leave him off this list, especially with all just his raw stats that he accumulated as well. Like you said, one of the few receivers to go over 15,000 yards. That doesn't happen by accident.
It's the 5 first team all pros, because Randy Moss, the guy that we just talked about, that's a lock, has 4. There's only one other wide receiver that we're going to talk about that probably deserves to be maybe spot 4, maybe 5, depending on how you look at it, that has 5. And so it's like, obviously Jerry Rice, when we talked about the 10 being like obviously an unattainable number, when you start just looking at kind of these accolades and the fact that you put up just such sheer production, it just vaults you into this conversation. It's not to say a guy like Sterling Sharp in NFL history, or a guy like Calvin Johnson, guys that had talent and stepped away from the game, whether it was for medical or personal reasons, that maybe had a shot to get there, but did it. T.O. did it, and he did it being kind of that diva wide receiver that we know guys to be. I mean, we saw during his era, guys like Chad Ochocinco and Steve Smith kind of having a little bit of an edge. And now in the modern era, we've seen guys like Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham, guys that can have a little bit more too to on and off the field, and that can be good and both bad for the team. At spot number 4, and I'm gonna have 2 doors. I know you're probably more fond of one than the other, but we have a guy that has 5 first-team All-Pros, is a very, very special athlete, has a nickname. Both of these guys have a nickname. We'll kind of gauge which one's better. Then we have another guy that has 3 first-team All-Pros, but he has gotten the most receiving yards in a single season. And we've talked about this off air. You know exactly who these 2 players are. But when you have some of those accolades, and I wouldn't put like Super Bowl rings or some of that in that, I'm just clearly that player's accolades, how would that rank up and how would that match? And so I'm talking about Calvin Johnson, Megatron, and Tyreek Hill, or the Cheetah. And both are special in their own rights, have done amazing things as players. Who gets the nod for you at 4?
It's really tough. And I think you could even shoehorn other players into this discussion, because after the top 2, and frankly, the top 3, it gets tough, right? I know I said earlier that I don't want to do current players, and I think eventually I'm going to stick with that because that's part of my rule. But I think Tyreek Hill has changed the game much more than Calvin Johnson has. Obviously, Calvin Johnson is we talked about how Randy Moss is like the prototypical receiver. Calvin Johnson is like the built in a lab kind of guy. He's like if you put I don't know, some scrawny receiver, if you put like Devontae Smith into the super soldier serum like Captain America went in, he'll come out looking like Calvin Johnson. Like that's kind of where we're at with him. Obviously, he's like the goal line fade guy. We see the pictures of him lining up against 3 corners. I think it was against the Saints, because they have to stop him somehow. He's just unstoppable and like unflappable. Really, really good receiver. Still the closest to 2,000 yards, even though Tyreek got pretty close a couple years ago. And I think he was really good. I think that what he did in 9 years is super impressive. I think even in the 9-year span, he still has the most yards in that grouping there. Consecutive years of 1,000 yards in his last 6 seasons, and he had 1,600 and 1,900 back-to-back. Like really, really good player. Wasn't on the best of teams, right? He was on like the poster child of bad management in that era, bad cap management, I would say, with the Detroit Lions. That's one of the reasons why the new CBA was drafted in 2011 or 2010 into 2011, because Calvin Johnson and Matt Stafford had all the money on that team. I think Ndamukong Suh as well. Really, really, really good receiver. And if I'm keeping current players off, I think I'd give it to him. But I think what Tyreek Hill's done from his speed and quickness standpoint, his ability to move the game in a more horizontal perspective, I think he's the first true receiver to stretch the field horizontally and make teams worry about it in that way. I think really his impact has been felt but I think it's been more impressive when he's been on the Dolphins and he's had a play caller really stress how to use him with motions, with bringing him across the field, with linking up with a quarterback that is nowhere near as good as Patrick Mahomes is, but can still get him the ball in space and have him get going rather. I think Tyreek Hill's impacted the game more, but because he's a current player, I think in this case I would cede it to Calvin Johnson.
About like Jerry Rice, I think is the like consummate wide receiver. Took care of his body, great hands, great route runner. Like the guy that everybody should want to be. Like that was Jerry Rice. Randy Moss, that 6'4", over 200 pounds, super fast. Like that was a element of if you wanted to draft a wide receiver, a build that you were looking for. And I think Calvin Johnson accentuated that even a little bit more, having similar speed, being a bigger human being. And you saw it all throughout his career, whether it was the production, him going up and really just mossing dudes. And it was the goal line fade. He was the only guy that it worked for. Out of all these wide receivers we've seen that have a bigger build to them or a possession wide receiver, nobody comes close to the numbers Megatron put up, which is why you saw 2 Saints players covering him on the goal line in that particular playoff game. So it's just very interesting when you talk about Calvin Johnson and Randy Moss, because Randy Moss played a little bit longer, put up a little bit more better stats. And so that's where I think Megatron almost falls short. Yes, he had over 10,000 receiving yards. Yes, he did a lot from a statistical standpoint. But when you talk about Tyreek Hill and his twitchiness, and I think his impact when it comes to motions and how that has transformed not only how offenses play pre-snap, but how defenses play pre-snap and how they all disguise things and how there's a lot of information and tells going on because of that. And Tyreek Hill is at the forefront of it. Between what he did in Kansas City and then what Mike McDaniel did on steroids and has been doing in Miami currently, it's just impressive. And so I think when you look at that and you look at the body of work and you do see 5 first-team All-Pros, I think when you look at it from box where we're checking off things, Calvin Johnson is a wide receiver I would want in my room. He's a better wide receiver in terms of just being able to line up on the outside, do what you want, manipulations. Nobody's going to be able to cover him. But if you're looking for a guy that's going to just bust the game wide open with his speed and explosiveness, there's nobody really quite like Tyreek Hill, because you've had guys that had speed like him, but his twitchiness and ability to accelerate and deaccelerate and his hands aren't actually that bad. Like Panthers fans, Ted Ginn sucked in terms of catching stuff, but he was wide open. It's like Tyreek Hill is wide open and he's catching stuff. And so I think that also makes the difference when we're looking at it from a production side with those special traits that he brings to the table.
Yeah, I think Calvin Johnson is the prototypical X receiver, right? Like that's kind of where we're looking at it here. But in terms of just receiver in general or athlete on the field, I think Tyreek Hill is probably the most impactful non-QB of the last decade, I would say. He's not the reason that you have to have 2 high safeties now or a cover 2 or whatever, but you can't do 1 safety against Tyreek Hill. You just can't, because he's always going to beat the corner in front of him with his speed, with his twitchiness. And a lot of these speedy receivers, they're really, really skinny. They're like toothpicks. Tyreek Hill's lower body, incredibly strong, can break through tackles, run through the weaker tackles like on nickel corners or some of these smaller DBs. I think that completeness to his game is what brings him into this conversation, right? 5 first-team All-Pros, like you're saying. We only talked about 2 other people that have done that so far. And when you look at it in that kind of perspective, one of those All-Pros was his rookie season. But when you look at it in that kind of perspective, it's hard to ignore. It's hard to leave him off of this debate. Like I said, because he's still playing, I think I would have to give the nod to Calvin Johnson. But as far as impact as a whole on the game, I think Tyreek Hill has done a good bit more from the receiver spot.
I do as well. And it's one of those things that I feel like Calvin Johnson and Tyreek Hill, it's like if you were to disassemble Randy Moss and like take different aspects, like you take a smaller Randy Moss, but he's a little bit faster, twitchier, has that acceleration to get in and out of breaks a little bit faster. That's Tyreek Hill. And then it's like Megatron. It's like you just take Randy Moss and make him bigger and kind of keep about the same speed. And it works out. And so it's like very interesting that that's kind of who we're talking about there. But other guys kind of off the list that I think follow similar molds, Julio Jones, I think he follows in that Megatron, even Randy Moss aspect where you're a big, fast, physical wide receiver. And he put up a bunch of stats. But when we're talking about guys with first team all pros, Julio Jones only has 2. Guy in his era that had a couple more, Antonio Brown, he had 4. I think some of the off-field issues will derail any conversations about him being talked about in this era. But I would say prime is up there with guys like Jerry Rice, Randy Moss, those guys that we've talked about today. And he has some of those accolades. So it's when we talk about guys that are outside of here in the top 10 wide receivers, those are guys that could be mentioned. You could go back, talk about a Marvin Harrison, Larry Fitzgerald when we talk about longevity. I don't know if Mike Evans, if he keeps doing what he's doing, is going to put himself in that conversation. Is there anybody we're really kind of leaving off when we talk about wide receivers and just the top guys who have impacted the game all time?
I think the greatest show on turf guys deserve a nod, like Isaac Bruce. I think Torrey Holt just made the Hall of Fame as well. Really, really good players there. You mentioned Marvin Harrison, right? Senior. Our guy, Steve Smith, right? Top 10 in receiving yards for a little guy with not good QBs throughout the vast majority of his career. I think you could say 2013 and 2012 Cam were pretty good. But other than that, hit or miss. And he was on a huge run first team, right? So as far as the receiving game goes, you knew it was going to be Steve Smith. And he was still putting up numbers. Was a Triple Crown winner in that team or on that team as well. You mentioned Antonio Brown, right? Larry Fitzgerald. I think he had a good impact on his team, like bringing them to the playoffs and that kind of thing. And still maybe the most consistent receiver ever in Larry Fitzgerald. More tackles than drops based on the interceptions that his QB threw, and he had to go hawk them down. Some guys in the past, Don Hudson, Lance Alworth, and Steve Largent, kind of before the era like we're talking about, kind of how we talked about with QBs, right? We're looking at the modern era. A lot of those guys were predating the passing revolution, so to speak. So couldn't really include those guys in here. And I think that's about it as far as past receivers go. Current receivers, I think there are a handful of guys that have a chance to sneak into that 4th spot because what we've discovered today is that 4th spot is really up for debate. And I think Justin Jefferson is the first one. To me, he's the best receiver in the game right now. I believe he still has the most receiving yards per game of every receiver ever. It's just under 100. So as far as longevity and production goes, if he keeps going for another decade, like you said, he's catching the Randy Moss numbers. He's catching the Larry Fitzgerald numbers. It's just going to depend on the QB throwing to him. AJ Brown, maybe. Like he's missed some time, but he's a really good X receiver in today's game. And then Jamar Chase just won the Triple Crown. You can't ignore that. You can't ignore what he and Joe Burrow have been able to do on a team that's it's really those two and T. Higgins. Other than that, the team struggles. So did you have any other current players you wanted to talk about that maybe have a chance to break in here? Other than Tedero McMillan, he'll be here eventually.
Well, I was going to maybe say Brian Thomas, the way that he exploded and he now gets to work with Liam Cohen. In terms of the modern guys, I think you hit the head on the nail there. Justin Jefferson, I think, is on the fast track to getting to maybe putting himself in that position, which is great. I mean, you follow in the tracks of another great Vikings legend and Randy Moss, a guy that kind of got passed up in the first round and really made his mark as soon as he kind of hit week 1, which was really impressive to see from just both of those guys and the career arcs they've had. AJ Brown, he plays and has played in very run heavy offenses going back to Tennessee and then now Philadelphia. And then you add that with the injuries. It takes away from some of the production numbers. I think it would be a little bit higher if he was in another offensive scheme, played more games. And I think that's going to keep him from hitting some of those numbers because being a bigger physical wide receiver with an injury history probably means he isn't going to have as long a career to be able to chase down some of these legendary numbers. But I'm not going to put it past him that a team that just got back to just won the Super Bowl and has been to 2 Super Bowls in the past 3 years isn't going to just let it loose and let AJ Brown get after it and maybe chase some numbers over the next couple of years. Jamar Chase, I mean, with how electric he is, the Triple Crown, like you said, I know I'm just reiterating points, but these are guys that are special in their own rights and are really, I think, on that Antonio Brown, Julio Jones kind of level in terms of just being a difference maker as a wide receiver in their era. And it's just a matter of how long they can keep it up and if they can hit some of these numbers. Can you hit 5 first-team All-Pros? Can you hit 10, 15,000 receiving yards. When you start doing that, you're putting yourself in these conversations because then you can compare to eras and go, okay, so how dominant were you there? Now, I will say I wouldn't say defend, but I feel like the wide receiver, in terms of value and production, has gone up recently. I feel like there was a little bit of a lull. And even going back to Jerry Rice's era, it's like, who is Jerry Rice competing with for some of that stuff? His numbers were insane and won't be touched again. But it wasn't like there were several other guys where like, oh yeah, he was wide receiver 2 or 3 during that era. And I think that has increased, which increases the talent level.
Yeah, I think that brings up a good point. A question I wanted to ask you before we wind up here: who is going to be in this era the AJ Green to Julio Jones and AB? So obviously in the 2010s, Julio and Antonio Brown, the best receivers, but AJ Green, I think, was the clear third guy, kind of overshadowed by those two because I believe still at the time it was only 2 first team All Pros until they changed it recently to include the slot guy. But I think Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase are the clear 2 best receivers in the game right now. We mentioned AJ Brown, so I don't want you to include him. Who is this era's, and it doesn't have to be in terms of play style, but who's this era's receiver that's going to continuously get overshadowed by those 2 or 3 guys?
Well, I think it goes back to the point I made about AJ Brown, is that even though his numbers aren't there, and I should have probably brought this up when talking about him, the on-off splits with AJ Brown are insane. Like he's one of the best, and he's got an insane yards per route run. So when you're looking at that impact with him on and off the field, going back to Tennessee, even looking at his time with Philadelphia, he puts so much strain on a defense that's not necessarily noticed in other aspects of the game. And that's where I don't know if we're really, I guess, seeing what he produces value-wise as compared to a Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, because he's not racking up the receptions, the yards, the touchdowns. And that's, I think, the discrepancy there. So if you're talking about a third fiddle, a guy that's right there, it's him, or a guy like CeeDee Lamb, who I did not have necessarily a down year. It was down because he was playing with a backup quarterback, but got over 1,000 yards, very productive wide receiver, almost had a triple crown 2 years ago. So it's one of those things that he is a great wide receiver. But we've had those 3 or 4, 5 guys because where you talked about the era just before, we had Des Bryant for a couple of years in there. We had Odell Beckham in there. Mike Evans has been throughout that entire duration. So there are guys that have popped up during there was they had a 2-3 year stint. So it's kind of hard to gauge who those guys are until you're looking back at it.
Yeah, it just came to me because back in the Julio, Antonio Brown era, you had AJ Green, I think was the third guy. Odell Beckham flashed in the pan. And Andre Johnson was coming off the tail end of his career. I think we have Tyreek Hill coming off the tail end of his career. You have Jefferson and Chase and AJ Brown. And then I was trying to look for who's kind of the next guy. I think CeeDee Lamb's the perfect reach there, especially if Dak's healthy, because we know that Dak can produce volume stats, right? Just look at a couple years ago, I think he led the league in passing touchdowns. The year Lamar won his second MVP. Dak can sling the ball. He can throw it. And I think now it might be a little different because George Pickens is there, and there's going to have to be some sharing of the ball when it comes to receivers and catching passes. But I think if Dak's healthy, they're still going to put up numbers, and CD's going to be a big beneficiary of it. Just comes down to what is the new head coach going to do for the team. Like, I know he didn't call plays last year, so what is Schottenheimer going to do for the Cowboys? But I think that gets us into takes territory. Do you have a take for today's episode?
I do. I do indeed. And what I want to say is the 4 greatest wide receivers in Panthers history all time. And this is what's going to make the take. The first 3 aren't the take. It's the 4th guy. So Steve Smith, Musa Muhammad, DJ Moore. All 3 had 1,000-yard receiving seasons, were very productive as Panthers receivers, and were all taken within the first 3 rounds. I think Musa Muhammad was a 2nd-round pick, Steve Smith was a 3rd, and obviously DJ Moore was a 1st-round pick. My number 4 hasn't played a single NFL snap, and that's because I believe in T-Mac, the only wide receiver that's been taken with a top 10 pick in our history. And I think he does give off the vibes of a Drake London or a physical possession receiver that we've seen in years gone by, like a Plexico Burress. And I think he is going to add that element of what we see with an A.J. Brown, where it's just you throw it up, and it doesn't matter who's covering him. He's bringing it down. And I think that aspect has been missing from the Panthers room. We've tried to get that with guys like Kelvin Benjamin and Devin Funchess. And there were times when Benjamin was healthy, he did that. But I think T-Mac does it for a longer time stamp. And I think he puts himself in that category. Because if we're talking about wide receiver number 4, it probably is Kelvin Benjamin, Panthers all time, when you're looking at receiving yards. Maybe it's Funchess, but I would still say KB at his prime was better. But that's my Mount Rushmore of wide receivers of Panthers all time. We have a guy that hasn't played a single snap in my top 4.
Wow, the Kelvin Benjamin disrespect. I would put him over DJ Moore. Rookie
KB was insane, dude. But he got fat, dude.
The year following the Super Bowl, he was also good as well. He was even decent in 2017 before the trade. So I think we're getting into the Calvin Johnson debate here. KB's peak is the best other than Steve Smith in our team's history.
And Moose. I would say Moose was better. Like Moose's 1,400-yard season in 2004 that got him
Kelvin
paid
Benjamin
in Chicago.
Is the prototypical X receiver size, speed, what you have it. Not route running. But it's particularly the size. He had the size, especially
the 2014 year. Like, don't get me wrong. Like he was making one-handed catches, and he was actually leading offensive rookie of the year voting until Odell Beckham started coming back from injury and playing. So don't get me wrong. I love me some like Kelvin Benjamin, like prior to the ACL injury, and even like you said, a year or two after. It was just he fell off so quickly. I think he left such a bad taste with the fan base, especially with how he just interacted with Cam Newton and Thomas Davis, and even made comments that it's hard to put him up there because DJ Moore never did that. He was a consummate pro in terms of just like, he kept it professional.
He's doing it now in Chicago.
Well, because everyone's doing it in Chicago. There's no standard there.
That's true. We'll have to see this year if he is still the wide receiver 1, if he continues to have, let's say, poor body language. My take is going to go back to the start of the episode about leaving our mark. In that hype video that the Panthers put out yesterday, they teased the 2003 year where we won the NFC, went to the Super Bowl, 2015 year where we won the NFC and went to the Super Bowl. My take is that we're going to leave our mark on the season and make it to the playoffs. I'm not going to say we win the Super Bowl, but I think that 8 and 9 could really win this division. And once we do like our division breakdown and stuff, maybe I change my mind. But for now, we're leaving our mark. We're getting to the playoffs. And that's what the season's going to be about this year.
This is great. So a couple of weeks ago, I say we're going to beat the Jacksonville Jaguars week 1 because that's what's got to kind of snowball this a little bit. You're saying we're making the playoffs, and who knows if everything starts clicking down the stretch, you have some injuries to other teams in the NFC. Because I'm going to be honest with you. We talked about top duos a couple of weeks ago. The Eagles, if their superstars get hurt, this is a team that could fall off very quickly. And we saw this literally in 2023 before they just went on the Super Bowl run, where the cupboards get a little bit bare with injuries and they aren't the same team. The 49ers, I think they're going to bounce back, win 10, 12 games, maybe be one of those like top teams. They could hit a couple injuries too with some of their older guys. We see what this team looks like when Trent Williams misses time. There is a path where some of these top teams where we see that top talent could come into the playoff to where the Panthers are playing teams like the Packers, who we talked about, don't have those blue chip guys. And I think a run is possible. That's all I'm getting at is that once we get there, once we punch that ticket, anything's possible, I think, on the NFC side with just how it's constructed. We don't have to go through Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, some of those guys where it's like, I just don't think our defense has a shot. Where in the NFC, I think if a couple things fall our way, we could be in the big game. So fingers crossed. I think that's all we have. Thursday, we'll bring another topic to you guys. We'll kind of go away from the Mount Rushmore series. We'll bring it back to talk about either offensive linemen or maybe switch the defense. But and anything else as we wrap up?
No, I like the points you made. we're not scared of Jordan Love is the point we're trying to make. But yeah, we'll be back Thursday. You can find us on Twitter, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your content. And until next time, leave your mark.